This is my house. I built it with my own hands, and today my own son was throwing me out of it. You enjoy emotional family stories filled with betrayal, secrets, and unexpected justice? Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. My name is David Miller. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a small town near Cologne, Germany. I spent most of my life working as a carpenter. Building things from wood was more than just my profession. It was something I truly loved, but the house I'm talking about was different from anything I had ever built. Every wall carried a piece of my life. Every room held memories of my late wife, Susan. We had built that house together. We had raised our son Ryan under that roof. For years, I imagined growing old there. I pictured myself sitting on the porch, drinking coffee in the morning and watching my grandchildren play in the garden. I thought that was how my life would end, quietly. With my family around me, I was wrong. After my wife passed away, the house became painfully quiet. Some evenings, I would sit alone at the kitchen table and stare at her empty chair. Then Ryan started visiting more often. One evening, he looked at me and said, "Dad, you're living here alone. Why don't Jessica and I move in? We can keep you company." I smiled. The idea made me happy. I thought my son genuinely wanted to be close to me. A few months later, Ryan and his wife, Jessica, moved into my house. At first, everything felt perfect. We had dinner together. My grandchildren came over on weekends. The house was finally full of laughter again. For the first time since Susan died, I didn't feel completely alone. But slowly, things began to change. Jessica started making decisions about the house without asking me. "This furniture looks outdated. Workshop takes up too much space. We should renovate the guest room." I didn't argue. I kept telling myself that everyone was simply trying to make the house more comfortable. Then one afternoon, Ryan came to me with a stack of documents. "Dad, these are just inheritance planning papers." I laughed. "Inheritance planning already?" He smiled. "It's just legal paperwork. It will make things easier for everyone later." I looked through the pages. There were so many legal terms that I barely understood. I wasn't a lawyer, and more importantly, I trusted my son. So I signed them. I had no idea that those few seconds would become one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Over the next few months, Ryan and Jessica became more controlling. They stopped asking for my opinion. They simply started making decisions. One morning, I walked into the garage and noticed that half of my workshop equipment was gone. I stared at the empty space. "Where is my equipment?" Jessica barely looked up from her phone. "We put it in storage. You could have asked me first." She shrugged. "This is a family home now." Her words stayed with me because suddenly I realized something. I was still living in my own house, but I no longer felt like I belonged there. Then came the evening I will never forget. We were sitting around the dinner table when Jessica started complaining about my friends. "You really shouldn't keep inviting people over all the time," she said. I looked at her. "These are friends I've known for decades. This isn't a social club." I shook my head. "I won't stop seeing my friends just because you don't like them." Ryan immediately took her side. "Dad, maybe you should listen to her." I looked at my son. "Why are you talking to me like this?" The argument became louder. Then Ryan suddenly slammed his hand on the table. Everyone went silent. He looked directly at me. "Dad, this isn't your house anymore." For a moment, I couldn't understand what he had said. "What? You heard me?" I stared at him. "You're joking." "Not." Sat quietly beside him. She didn't look surprised. That was when I realized they had already discussed this. My throat went dry. "What are you saying?" Ryan stood up. "You need to leave." I looked at him in disbelief. That was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy I had worked extra shifts for, the boy whose college expenses I had paid when money was tight. And now he was telling me to leave the home I had spent decades building. I could barely speak. "Ryan, this is my home." Walked to a drawer and pulled out a file. Then he placed it on the table. "Not anymore." I opened the file. My hands started shaking. I recognized the documents immediately. They were the papers I had signed months earlier, the same papers Ryan had called inheritance planning. I looked at him. "What did you make me sign?" He didn't answer, and in that moment, I finally understood that my son had not simply betrayed my trust. He had planned this. That night, I packed one suitcase. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten him. I didn't even ask him to change his mind. I simply walked out of the front door of the house I had built with my own hands. But Ryan didn't know one thing, and that one thing would eventually change everything. That night, I stayed in a small motel about 20 minutes from my old home. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan standing at the dinner table with that cold expression on his face. I kept asking myself the same question. How could my own son do this to me? At 6 the next morning, I called an old friend of mine, Michael Harris. Michael had been a lawyer for more than 30 years. We had known each other since our children were young. When I explained what had happened, he didn't interrupt me. He simply said, "David, bring every document you signed. Don't throw anything away." Hours later, I was sitting in his office. Michael spread the papers across his desk. He read the first page, then the second, then the third. His expression slowly changed. Finally, he looked up at me. "David, I need to ask you something." "What?" "When you signed these documents, did anyone explain exactly what you were signing?" I shook my head. "Ryan told me they were inheritance papers. He said they were meant to make things easier for the family later." Michael leaned back in his chair. "David, these aren't simply inheritance papers." My stomach tightened. "What are they?" He pointed to one section. "You signed a transfer of ownership." For several seconds I couldn't speak. You mean the house? Yes, I stared at the document. Ryan owns it. According to this document, yes. I lowered my head. The truth hurt more than I expected. I had trusted my own son so completely that I hadn't even considered the possibility that he could deceive me. But Michael wasn't finished. He turned another page. There's something strange here. What? This transfer has several irregularities. I looked at him. What kind of irregularities? There is no record that you received independent legal advice before signing. Is that important? It can be. Continued reading. There is another problem. Tapped the page with his finger. A required declaration appears to be missing from the registration documents. I felt a small spark of hope. What does that mean? It means we need to investigate before you assume you've lost everything. For the first time since leaving my house, I felt like I could breathe again. Michael began requesting records from the land registry, the bank, and the notary who had handled the paperwork. I waited. For several days, nothing happened. Then Michael called me. David, I need you to come to my office. His voice sounded different, serious. I drove there immediately. When I entered his office, he had a thick folder waiting for me. What's going on? He pushed the folder toward me. Your son has already started making plans for the house. I opened it. Inside were renovation estimates, a new kitchen, a luxury bathroom, a swimming pool, and then I saw something that made my heart sink, a mortgage application. Ryan was trying to borrow a large amount of money against the property. I looked at Michael. He's trying to mortgage my house. Technically, he's trying to mortgage the house he believes belongs to him. I felt a strange mixture of anger and sadness. He hadn't even waited for the dust to settle. He had already started spending money on a future he believed was guaranteed. Can he do it? Michael shook his head. The bank rejected the application. Why? Michael opened another document. Because there is an old restriction attached to the property. I stared at him. What restriction? That's what I found interesting. He showed me the land registry record. The registration went back more than 30 years. Suddenly, I remembered something. When Susan and I were building the house, we had taken a construction loan from the bank. There had been complicated legal conditions attached to it. After we paid the loan off, I completely forgot about most of the paperwork. Apparently, one clause had remained attached to the property. Michael explained that certain major legal actions involving the property could not be completed without my written consent. Ryan had never removed that restriction, and he probably didn't even know it existed. I sat silently. For months, Ryan had believed he had taken everything from me. He believed I had no choice but to walk away, but he had made one serious mistake. He had assumed that the papers told the whole story. They didn't. Michael looked at me. David, there's still a lot of work to do. Can we get the house back? I can't promise that yet. I nodded. I understand. But we have grounds to challenge the transfer. What do you need from me? Everything you remember. I began going through old files, bank statements, construction permits, tax records, insurance documents, letters from the original lender, even old receipts I had kept in boxes for decades. Then I found something I had completely forgotten about, an old letter from the bank. It was dated 35 years earlier. Michael read it carefully, then he looked at me. David, this could be important. Does it say? He turned the letter toward me. It confirmed that the original property agreement required my written approval for certain future transfers and financial transactions, and there was something else. The letter showed that the restriction had never been formally removed. Ryan thought he had found the perfect way to take control of my home. Instead, he had left behind a legal trail. Michael picked up his phone. Going to have to take the next step. I knew exactly what he meant. Court. I had never wanted to fight my own son, but I also knew something else. If I did nothing, Ryan would believe that what he had done was acceptable. And I couldn't allow that. A few days later, Ryan received the legal notice. His reaction came faster than I expected. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Ryan. For a moment, I simply stared at his name. Then I answered. Dad, what have you done? His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was nervous. I looked out the motel window, and for the first time since I had walked away from my house, I felt completely calm. I said only 4 words. Talk to my lawyer. Then I ended the call. I didn't know how the case would end, but I finally knew one thing. Ryan had believed he was throwing me out of my home. Now he was about to discover that he had never understood the full story. The mediation meeting was scheduled for the following week. I walked into the room with Michael beside me. Ryan was already there with Jessica. He looked different. The confidence was gone. For the first time, he looked like the son I remembered. Michael placed the documents on the table, the property records, the original bank agreement, the transfer papers, and the missing declaration. The mediator looked at Ryan. Did you explain to your father that he was permanently transferring ownership of the property? Ryan hesitated. I explained that it was part of the family inheritance plan. Wasn't my question, the mediator replied. Ryan looked down. The room became completely silent. Jessica suddenly spoke. He signed the documents. Michael calmly answered. Signing a document doesn't automatically erase every legal requirement surrounding that document. Case eventually moved to court. The judge reviewed everything carefully. The notary who had handled the original paperwork was questioned. He confirmed that I had signed the documents. but there was no clear record showing that I had received independent legal advice before the transfer. Then the old bank agreement became the turning point. The restriction attached to the property had never been removed. That meant Ryan could not simply treat the house as an unrestricted asset. He couldn't mortgage it. He couldn't sell it freely. And more importantly, the court now had serious questions about how the transfer had been arranged. The judge turned toward Ryan. Mr. Miller, did your father understand that he was giving up ownership of his home? Ryan swallowed. I believed he understood. The judge paused. Believing something is not the same as making sure someone understands it. Ryan said nothing. 2 weeks later, the decision was announced. The property transfer was cancelled. The house was legally returned to me. For several seconds, I simply sat there. I had imagined that moment many times. I thought I would feel victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. I felt relieved. And strangely enough, I felt sad because I had never wanted to defeat my son. I had only wanted my son to stop treating me like someone who didn't matter. Outside the courtroom, Ryan approached me. His eyes were red. Dad, I stopped walking. He stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then he whispered, sorry. I looked at him. You should be, lowered his head. I know. I waited. Then I said something I had been carrying inside me for months. You didn't just take my house, Ryan. Looked up, you took my trust. His eyes filled with tears. I know. Trust doesn't come back because someone says sorry. I understand. For once, he didn't argue. He didn't blame Jessica. He didn't blame the paperwork. He didn't blame me. He simply accepted what he had done. That mattered more than I expected. A month later, Ryan moved out of the house. I could have forced him to leave immediately, but I gave him 30 days, not because I had forgotten what happened, because I didn't want revenge to turn me into someone I wasn't. Jessica eventually left too. Their marriage did not survive the pressure, but I never celebrated that. Their problems were theirs. My problem was learning how to live with what my own son had done. For several months, Ryan and I barely spoke. Then one Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it. Ryan was standing there alone. No expensive car, no excuses, no paperwork, just my son. Can I come? Stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table where so many family dinners had happened. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan said, I thought having the house would make me successful. I looked at him. Did it? He shook his head. No, he took a deep breath. I thought you were holding me back. Thought everything would be easier if the house belonged to me. Now I realize I almost lost my father for a house. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, you haven't lost me. Looked surprised, but things are going to be different. Nodded. I know. I didn't forgive him that day. Forgiveness isn't a switch you turn on. It takes time. Over the next year, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes we worked together in my workshop. Sometimes we simply sat in silence. Ryan began taking responsibility for his decisions. He never asked for the house again. He never asked me for money. And slowly I began trusting him again, not completely, but enough to believe that maybe my son had finally understood the value of what he nearly destroyed. Today I still live in that house. The same house Susan and I built. The same porch where I once imagined growing old. Sometimes I sit outside with a cup of coffee and look at the walls. I remember the night I walked away with one suitcase. I remember thinking I had lost everything, but I hadn't. I had lost my sense of security. I had lost my trust in my son, but I had not lost myself, and that turned out to be the most important thing, because Ryan thought he had won when he put me outside that door. He thought ownership was power. He was wrong. The real power was staying calm when someone expected me to fall apart. The real revenge wasn't destroying my son. It was standing up for myself without becoming cruel. And the biggest lesson I learned was simple. Never sign something you don't understand, no matter how much you trust the person standing beside you. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from a stranger. Sometimes it comes from the person you would have trusted with everything. And when that happens, protecting yourself isn't revenge, it's self-respect. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments. Would you forgive your own child after something like this? If you enjoyed the story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories.